All right. I'm going to go ahead and jump in and kick off today's session. Thank you all so much for joining today. We have quite a few folks on the webinar today. As a quick reminder for you as we go through the content, I will walk through a lot of the concepts and kind of key shifts that we're talking through in terms of building a successful sales enablement program, but also want to make sure this is interactive so there'll be plenty of time for you to share your questions and I'll answer questions for you while we're here today. So with that, welcome again to building a successful sales enablement program in partnership with Sales Enablement Collective. Really excited to be here and to have you all with us today. As a quick introduction for those who maybe don't know me, my name is Jeff Jaworski. I've sat on all sides of the table over the past 20 plus years. I spent nearly a decade on the agency side making really important buying decisions and managing a 9-figure portfolio. I spent about 12 and a half years at Google, both as a sales and enablement executive, most recently leading their large customer sales organization on the enablement side, including building out key critical programs for their audience, such as Google Sales School, which was our award-winning onboarding program, as well as founding and creating Google's award-winning global sales coaching program. I'm also a certified coach and facilitator, and as I mentioned, have built a number of amazing programs that I'm excited to share those experiences with you all today. So with that, I'm just going to ground the group really quickly, and we're going to go through a lot of great stuff, but it's not going to necessarily answer every single question you have, or it might create more questions for you. So as a kind of heads up for you all, I operate in this space as a both a coach and a consultant. So if coming out of today's session, you have more questions, you want to explore ways that we can work together, we'll send you a little bit more here, but you can go ahead and scan that QR code in the corner. You'll learn a little bit more about the work that I do more broadly in this space. And then I now offer keynote talks, workshops, and advisory support on actually this exact topic we're going to go through today and a number of other topics. So please don't hesitate to reach out if any of that's interesting to you. And then in the chat, we'll share a couple of links with you for some free additional resources on this topic, such as a keynote talk I did on it, a podcast. There's an article with more kind of written format in it, and a workbook that you can use and bring to your organization on your own as well. So with that, our purpose for today, what you will learn is gaining insight into the key shifts that will help you build a successful sales enablement program based on my firsthand experiences doing this over the past 20 years and my experience at Google. What I hope you'll gain is some inspiration and some actions that you can take back to your organization so you can start to apply, implement these shifts, and also check with yourself and see, kind of how many of these are we actually applying today? How could we do this better? And then, I can't see you all as I do the webinar, but in terms of how does this sound, hopefully you're on board, you're not multitasking, and you're fully focused on the conversation we're having today. So with that, building a successful sales enablement program, based on my experience and in my opinion, requires 5 really key and critical shifts to make this work. So I'll jump right into those. Shift number 1 really gets into addressing the how, not just the what. So in my experience, oftentimes what we've faced is we're really caught up in making sure that our sellers or audiences have the knowledge that they need about our products, about our solutions, about our differentiators. It might even be about how do they manage pipeline, how do they progress deals forward, things of that nature. A lot of kind of knowledge transfer, informational flow in terms of the things that they maybe need to know, but then we lose sight sometimes of what they actually need to do to be successful. And what I mean by that is, as an example, with Google's global sales coaching program, we really started to orient around what is kind of a key outcome we need our sales audience to get better at. And that key outcome and kind of problem to solve for us was around driving more effective customer meetings. Well, more effective customer meetings doesn't necessarily always mean more knowledge. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you can have, too much, right? You know too much about your products, you know too much about your solutions. And as a result, you actually run the risk of actually not showing up properly throughout the flow of the conversations you're having with prospects and customers. So we really flipped that model and really lean much more into what is the skills that we can really focus on and the outcomes that we can prioritize that will drive a better result for the business. So for the enablement folks on this call, I'm going to give you a acronym and I'm going to reframe it for you. So we're all very familiar with SKO, sales kickoff, et cetera. There's a lot of work, a lot of effort that goes into those programs, right? If you reframe SKO and you flip it and reverse it, I'll give you kind of an equation you can use that will help you kind of test what are the main focus areas that we're leaning into, and do we have the right thought process around how we're doing that? So if you take SKO and work backwards, you start with the outcome. The O is the outcome. What is the outcome we are trying to drive first and foremost? When we thought about this at Google, the outcome that we were looking to drive, especially with the sales coaching program, was we want to make sure our sellers are prepared to run much more effective meetings with our customers, because we knew that there was a really strong correlation to our partner satisfaction, our meeting effectiveness, driving significant gains in revenue. So our outcome that we really leaned into was, how do we drive more effective customer meetings? Okay, great. We want to drive more effective customer meetings. Then you get into, in order to drive that outcome, what do they need to know and what do they need to do in order to drive that, right? So we would then step back and say, okay, sure, there's some knowledge that they need to have around our products and solutions and all of that. That's all fine and good. What we really leaned into even more so was around the skill. What are the things they need to do to actually drive a more effective meeting? So I'll walk you through a couple examples of how we thought about that. We worked our way backwards to the outcome and said, okay, what does an effective meeting actually look like as an example? Well, they need to know how to properly open and close the meeting. You may have noticed I started a webinar with what we would call a purpose benefit check. I was very clear of the purpose of the time we're going to have today, what I hope you will gain from the time that we have today, and then checking in with my audience to make sure we have alignment on how we're going to use that time today. You then also make sure that you've actually reserved enough time for a proper close to thank the audience for their time, to make sure that we've aligned on the objective that we started with. Did we achieve those goals? Get a little feedback. Then you move your way into the action items, the next steps, booking and securing the next meeting if you have to, and then ending on time, or in true, even expert move mode, ending a few minutes early for the audience, and then move on to the next thing that they need to do. Inside of the meeting, then we think about, do we have clarity on what type of meeting we're having? Is this a discovery meeting? Are we ready to pitch? Do we know enough? Having a framework for how we do the structured discovery when we need to actually lean into a discovery type of space. And then as we flow through it, how are we properly delivering in the meeting? Do we have a clear kind of framework and way that we're making sure the audience has something to care about? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Really clear on the things that we're going to do to solve that problem for them and the impact it's going to drive for their business. And then using stats as support, but really stories to sell. So we would lean really heavily into, what are the stories that we're trying to tell our audience, our participants, so that they understand the benefits in a much more memorable way. So as an example, I'll share with you, as we went through the sales coaching program and building out the proof of concept for that, one of the first coaching sessions we ever did went something like this. A seller essentially prepared the delivery and said, hey, customer, today I'd like to talk to you about 3 things. The first thing I'd like to talk to you about today is product A. The second thing I'd like to talk to you about today is product B. And the third thing I'd like to talk to you about today, if we have time, is if there's anything top of mind for you. Imagine if you were to do that and extrapolate that across the millions of meetings and customer meetings happening every single day, right? So this really was a critical example and moment for us to make sure we understand, what is the outcome we're trying to drive, and then how do we rethink the skills and how our sellers show up to actually deliver that outcome. And as a sales team and an enablement team, making sure that we've actually equipped them to properly think about like how you do that, and then give them the coaching and practice and feedback to really lean into that. Okay, so that's shift number 1. We sat on that for a while because that's a really important kind of anchor point for us in terms of the work we do and leaning into the how. And again, rethinking SKO, right? And working it backwards. The outcome plus what do you need to know and do to drive towards that particular outcome. Whether you're a sales team or an enablement team, how do you equip your teams to do that? That's number 1. As we move into number 2, we can say, great, okay, we're going to address the how, we're going to lean into that more. Or we're already doing that, right? We already do trainings in that space. We have a motion, we have a methodology, we do that, right? Here's number 2 shift. We need to move beyond checking boxes and truly start changing behavior. So many enablement orgs, and we were also guilty of this many times, in the work I did over the years and the work I did at Google, is you get caught up in what's kind of the next quarterly OKR, what's the next deadline, what's the next kind of compliance exercise that a particular audience needs to go through to say, check, they did a thing. This is not to say that there are not moments for that, whether it's for legal requirements, privacy requirements, certifications that they need to have, et cetera. Not saying that you'll never have them check a box again, but the goal is to really challenge yourself around, are we putting something out there in front of our audience just to say they did it? Or are we doing it in a way that is simple, scalable, and repeatable, that they can actually drive a better behavior over time that will then deliver on the outcomes we've now prioritized based on the shift that we just talked about, shift number one. So really leaning into and challenging yourself around, is this just a box checking exercise, or are we actually going to be driving a behavior that will deliver on an outcome that we've agreed is really important, right? A couple things you could do to, ask yourself this question, and especially as I know a lot of teams are already going through their planning exercises and starting to think about 2026, is as you look at your plans, number one, say, okay, what are we asking them to do? Once they've done that, is it complete? Like, is the box checked? Or what's going to happen next? Right? How are you going to reinforce and sustain that behavior? Because the reality is, if you have them do that box checking exercise once, especially if it's a knowledge transfer thing or even a skill that you teach them, but you never reinforce it, the likelihood that they'll remember it and apply it is incredibly, incredibly low. So, really, really orient around, challenge yourself to say, if we're doing a checkbox exercise, is it a truly a compliance thing that we know and there's a point in time they need to be refreshed in a certain thing for legal, privacy requirements, or a certification that's really important? And you're okay with, like, once they've done that, we know they've done what they need to do. Um, if not, really challenge yourself around, like, what's going to happen next? How are we going to actually sustain that behavior is really, really the key here. So I encourage you to, look at your existing plans, but and also look at your plans moving forward and say, be really clear. Is this a box checking exercise, or do we need to anchor on behavior change to drive a certain outcome? So that's shift number two. As we move forward to shift number three, so now we've talked about, we're going to lean into the how, we're going to become more outcome driven. What do they need to know and do to drive towards a particular outcome? How do we sustain those things by going beyond checking boxes and really changing behavior? Now we have to start thinking about, okay, what is that going to mean for the audience as we move forward? Shift number three really gets into making sure it's happening for them, not to them, right? So the outcome we've aligned to drive should be something that's going to be impactful to them in their role and for the business. The way we deliver it should really help them change their behavior, not just check a box, which, by the way, if you go back to the box checking, a lot of goals are anchored in kind of like a quarterly deadline, or they might get a 48-hour deadline on those things. And oftentimes they end up completing it because they're forced to complete that versus actually saying, no, this is going to actually really help me and I need to get this done and continue to lean in the space. So what happens is a lot of times they reserve it for the end of the quarter. And then the challenge you run into is the end of the quarter should actually be the time that they're trying to actually like hit and exceed their numbers. But instead they might be feeling pestered to like get a training done. That's the worst space an enablement team can be in a space where they feel like they're taking the sales team away from the activity they need to drive. So this then gets you into shift number three, making it happen for them, not to them. So whether it's a workshop, whether it's a coaching session, whatever format it is that you're delivering, the goal and the challenge to think about is, when they are finished, can they now do something differently and better in their job immediately for the next client meeting they have, for the next, XYZ kind of outcome it is that you're looking to drive? Will they actually say, like, wow, this like helped me and I can now do something differently now, right? So if I were to reorient around, workshops as an example, a lot of workshops, sometimes there's like a case study and you might say, okay, we're going to use a particular client example and you're all going to work on this particular client example. That's okay, that's fine to a degree, but the challenge you run into with that is, a lot of times they'll say, well, that doesn't really apply to me. That customer is not like my customer, or this particular objective is not something that I'm faced with, or this objection doesn't make sense for based on what I'm trying to do. And then they solved kind of a fake situation that doesn't really apply to their work. So if you reorient that around, you can use that as examples, but the work that they do should be directly applied to their situation, directly applied to their client, and directly applied to something they can work through in that particular moment and walk out with tangible ways to actually utilize it and apply it immediately to the work that they do. So again, you can do that in a workshop. You can do that through, coaching and practice, with AI. There's a lot of amazing AI platforms out there that can help you do that. Or through coaching, practice, and feedback, with kind of the enablement team, the coaches, the managers, et cetera. But really leaning into like this should truly happen for them. And when they walk out, feel very strongly that they can immediately apply what they've learned as a result. So that gets into shift number three. As we move into shift number four, the other kind of challenge to really think through and solve is to do this really well, it's critical that we meet our sellers at their time of need. So oftentimes, and I've been behind on both sides of this coin, right? I've been the seller and sales leader experiencing training programs. I've been the one helping kind of plan and deploy these programs. The more that they can feel met in the flow of their work, meaning you can actually support them in a key, in a team meeting versus a pre-scheduled workshop, or you can actually like deliver a coaching session for them and apply the practice for a meeting they have, coming up in 2 weeks. It's really thinking about like how do we embed ourselves inside of the flow of their work and not necessarily based on when we feel like we're ready for them to do things and based on frankly like our Gantt chart. Our audience should never see the Gantt chart. They should never be able to predict like, oh, I know when this team's going to start delivering stuff to us and it's going to kind of drop on us because, Q4 they leave us alone because we say we're too busy to kind of close out the year. Q1 they're busy kind of building out their plans before they start to deploy. Then you chunk in Q2 and Q3, you're trying to activate these things, you get into summer and it becomes really hard. You're trying to, press and push a lot of, frankly, incredible work that the team has done, I'm sure, to actually like support their needs. When in reality, if you're meeting them in their flow, the irony of it is like when an enablement team is leaving the sales team alone in Q4, that should actually be a flag for you that you are not providing programs that help them in the most important moments. So if I was to use an example again with the coaching program was always on all the time, January to the end of the year. You could get coaching, practice, feedback, work through the objections, work through a discovery call, whatever that is, at any point in the year. And Q4 is a critical time to deliver, especially for a lot of different companies or sales teams that might be working with retailers, things of that nature. Think about the opportunity here, actually. If you were able to open up the entire calendar and say, hey, as an enablement function, or even as a sales team, if you don't have an enablement function, here's how we can support you at every critical moment throughout the entire year. Now, is this to say that you're not going to have programs that you need to build, design, plan, prepare that don't exist yet? And those things might get aligned on in periods like Q4 and built out in Q1, sure. But the more that you go back to the first piece and you become very outcome driven, and that's an outcome you can consistently and repeatedly lean into and prioritize and focus on, you will move into much more of a evolution space, launch, iterate, learn, improve over time versus feeling like you've got to continually rebuild things. I'd also add, with the proliferation of AI, more times than not, you can meet them truly in their flow by giving them the right resources. It doesn't always have to be human intervention. Now, the enablement team can have ways to have human intervention. It could be you can sign up for a workshop. When you need us to work on a certain thing, we'll come to your next team meeting. Instead of you talking through static topics or talking about your pipeline, let's talk about how we help you close more pipeline, right? Really intervening and becoming a part of that, and thinking about also different technologies where they can utilize it at any point that they may need it, the manager or the seller, as they kind of work through their day-to-day priorities throughout the entire year. So really the prompt here is to think about like when you map out the delivery of your programs, are these things happening in the flow of their work? And if you find yourself saying to yourself like, oh well, we leave the sales team alone in Q4, then I would really like challenge yourself to say, what could we be doing to help them in Q4? Because for many people, Q4 is the most important quarter. And if you're challenged to do any delivery in Q1 because you're busy building new programs, think about like, well, what are the things that we could continually do that doesn't always have to be new? Oftentimes, enablement teams get caught up in what I call campaigns, where you build out a program, there's a big kind of hurrah around it, it gets kicked off, you go through the run of it, it's done, you go through your planning, and then you do it all over again. I would challenge you to think about like what are the things we should be continually doing always, and then just improving upon those things versus always kind of finishing something as a campaign and then thinking about how do we do it again. So again, really meet them in their flow. And if there was a prompt or a challenge, I would offer to the audience, especially if you're in enablement, if you find yourself resonating with the comment I made about Q4, leave the sales team alone, Q1, we're busy building, I would just open the question to yourself and say, how could we help them every day in their flow at their time of need? And mitigate that kind of feeling or that assumption that those are times that you can't actually support them. Which then leads me to shift number 5. You can deliver all the amazing outcomes you want, what they need to know, what they need to do, think through a perfect strategy in terms of like how you're going to deploy it, make sure it's, being done as a behavior changing exercise driven by a clear outcome, making sure it's happening for them, making sure it's in the flow of their work. The reality is, if you are not truly in it with them, meaning the audience that you serve has felt very much heard and very much aligned with the work that you're doing, you will always be seen as a cost. You will always be seen as, well, I've got to get this thing done because I was asked to get this thing done, but I'm not sure why I'm doing it. So, one of the really important things we did, one of the first things we did when I joined the enablement org at Google was said, how do we actually like make sure this feels like a much stronger joint partnership and not necessarily something they feel is again happening to them. We're like throwing it over the fence and saying you need to get these things done. So we put a structure in place. We tore a page out of the sales team's books. Like one of the big things they do is make sure they have joint plans with their most important customers, right? Same thing. What are your objectives? What are your needs? What are your goals? How can we as an organization best support those? And then are there some mutual goals we can work towards, where certain resources, et cetera, are needed to do that? And we jointly and mutually agree and commit to do those things. So we built what we call joint learning plans, which is really focused on, again, what are the biggest needs of the business, of the audience we serve? What are the biggest challenges they are facing? How can we best align with them, be a strategic partner? And of course, we may identify problems to potentially solve. We actually are the ones that identified the ineffective meetings kind of problem and challenge, brought it to the business and talked them through that. We didn't make an assumption inside of our walls of like, we should go solve this. Here's how we're going to build it. And hey, you now need to do this to drive more effective meetings. It was really a joint kind of alignment and partnership. And then we put governance in place to make sure the business could identify key stakeholders that would advise us on the work we would do, give us feedback, help us shape it. And then, before we, kind of finalize our plans and decisions, have a steering committee that actually was our decision making forum to say, okay, as we go through these plans, let's set some goals, let's set some kind of strategic structure, if you will, around the work we're doing. And then we kind of had a living, breathing document that both parties said, okay, this is what we're going to do and prioritize. Now, that's not to say that you're never going to run into situations where all of a sudden we've got to work on a particular priority that maybe wasn't in the plan, but you have something you can go back to and say, okay, here's where we currently are today. If we were to make some adjustments here, what are some trade-offs we might need to make? So it's really thinking through the governance, the structure, and the mutual alignment around the things that you're trying to do, and having a joint plan in place to do that. So with that, the 5 key shifts in a very brief period of time, shifting from really heavy investment in the what and the knowledge and the things they need to know and do and know, to a combination of the knowledge, but also what they need to do to show up better in the moments that matter that will drive better outcomes for the business. Shifting away from just checking boxes to really leaning into changing behavior, making sure it's not happening to them. It truly feels like it's happening for them. They can apply it immediately to the day to day work that they're doing for their customers, moving it much more into the flow of their work so that as they're operating, it doesn't actually feel like training. It feels like help and enablement and support. And again, they can get benefits from that immediately. And then the closer you can get with the business directly to strategically partner and align. And I know a lot of enablement teams talk about having a charter. I would encourage you look back at that charter with a fresh lens and say, is this charter about us aligning on what we do and our scope? or is this a joint partnership and plan that the business and ourselves have mutually aligned to deliver together? So, with those 5 shifts, I'm confident you can build a successful sales enablement program. And I will round out just by saying, again, if you want even more, you can scan the QR code. There's a lot more information about the work my organization does, the work I do in terms of keynotes, workshops, etc. You will get some free additional resources around this particular topic. But I am available for virtual support and in-person support. So feel free to give us feedback, and also if there's a request you'd like to submit, we're happy to further explore that with you. And with that, I wanted to create just a lot of space for any questions that might emerge for the audience, because we do have quite a few people here. So I'm going to stop there and just say a huge thank you. I'm going to open up the Q&A, and then the QR code in the corner is simply, we would love your feedback. Um, Feel free to give it a scan. Let us know, what went well with the webinar as you go through it today. Is there anything we could do differently to make these better in the future? And then if there is a request that you'd like to submit and you'd like to get some more information, you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. And then we'll reach out in terms of next steps from there. So I will stop with the presentation portion, and we will now move into Q&A. And I see lots of folks from amazing spaces: France and Vancouver and Chicago and Raleigh, Brooklyn, San Fran, Colorado. Awesome. I love it. All over the world. Very good. Okay. So let's see where we're at on questions. Okay. So we're going to start with Lynn. Thank you for your question, comment. Would love to get your perspective of the role of managers, leaders in enablement programs. I didn't hear you mention them in your 5 shifts. I feel that they are key. I love that you added this. So if managers were actually a huge critical component, especially to the sales coaching program we built at Google. So in the structure of that program, we did have coaching leads in place, but we also actually had a cohort of managers who became part of the coaching team. They also got trained and certified, if you will, on how to help their team become, better at driving the effective meetings, but also better coaching their teams. And at the kind of last stage, as I moved on from Google, there was actually over 100 managers directly involved in the program that frankly became an extension of the enablement team. And then some of the data that we were able to pull showed, number one, the coaching sessions themselves were driving meaningful lift in meeting effectiveness and partner satisfaction. And we actually compared managers who were coaches in the program, but managers who were not. And the managers who were coaches in the program consistently outperformed the managers who were not part of the program. So I love that addition. Managers were a huge, huge part of this. The more that you can actually get them as advocates bought in, and then frankly, in the sales coaching example, involved in the program, they become a true extension of your team. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Lynn, but feel free to jump in if I missed anything there. Okay, Nia, we're going to go to Nia and then Anant. How do you balance being proactive and reactive? Okay, so that's a big question, and especially for the enablement organizations, I think that you face that a lot, and the sales orgs too, right? There's a lot of just pressure. The pressure's rising. It can often feel very chaotic, and trying to get done as many things as you can do. I'm a big believer that even in the midst of kind of chaos and the risk of reactivity, the most important thing you can do is slow down. Take a step back, think through what are the main things we need to do, what are the main outcomes we need to drive, and you can take a really hard look and say, are our plans delivering on that today? Has anything changed that may make us need to revisit that? And if we need to revisit that, let's have a clear and open conversation around what the priorities need to be and what trade-offs we may need to face as a result. I think it's very easy to get caught up in things getting thrown at you and reacting to those things and getting those things done because there's pressure to feel like you need to do that. What I found is the most successful leaders and enablement functions, they are willing to slow down, step back, and again, no different than in sales, go through a little bit more discovery and think through, number one, if we've been proactive enough, we've identified some of the things we need to do. Number two, if there's a reactive request coming through, we can take a step back, look at it, and then drive the right kind of point of clarity and alignment to move forward. Okay. Anant, sometimes too much enablement would be perceived as a lot or overwhelming by the sales teams. How do we maintain a balance between purposeful enablement versus on the go enablement? Love the question, right? So, this is where I think there's a little bit of art and science to this. If you are in it, they will feel like it's too much or overwhelming in a world where it feels like it's being thrown at them, right? If they feel they're too busy, there's too many trainings for them to take, there's too many deadlines attached to it, the natural reaction will be, this is too much. I'm overwhelmed with this. I don't have time for this. So the more that you can actually embed and kind of put these things inside of the flow of their work, it feels much less like training. It's more so kind of important like intervention moments and support moments that help them do their job better. So the coaching program did that by allowing them to actually sign up for coaching sessions versus being forced to go to coaching sessions. And that was a big difference, right? We had OKRs around how many coaching sessions we should drive, who's involved, why are they involved, things of that nature. But the actual delivery of the program was much more focused on, we want to come support you when you need us. So it was less about like, why am I having to do a thing versus like, I need to do this thing because I know it will help me have a better result as I go to this kind of key CMO meeting or whatever it might be in 2 weeks. So I think that's an important piece, right? Is if they're feeling like it's too much or overwhelmed, take a step back and maybe just like do a little bit more discovery on like what's driving that feeling and how could we strategically maybe adjust as a result. Melissa, I think this is more of a comment. I love the insight, and it's a great, let's see, great metric to be able to track management. Yep, great. Um, Kate Klein, do you have any tips for getting at the root behavior change to solve versus what the transactional asks are? What your sales stakeholders might need? That's a great question. So I'll use the ineffective meeting one maybe as an example, and then you can think about how to apply it to different potential outcomes. So we uncovered that more so because there was data that we would do on an annual basis with our customers to understand a bunch of different things. Do we understand your objectives? Do we hold effective meetings? Do we design effective solutions? Things of that nature. And we did some additional assessment around that to understand like what are the ones that are going to kind of most likely to drive um, better results, and the meeting effectiveness one was also in decline. So we anchored around that, leaned into that, but then we did do some conversation discovery and kind of, pressure testing that with our audience to understand how important would that be for them to solve. I'd say at the highest level order, this is an example of like having a more strategic conversation with the business, right? It's easy to like get caught up in the, hey, I think our sellers need to be more X, or I think our managers need to be more Y, right? And then react to that. But the more we keep reacting to the latest kind of fire drill, if you will, of how they're thinking about things, you're left at the end of the year saying, we did a bunch of things you asked for. I'm not sure it actually moved the needle. So a lot of this comes back to like doing the proper discovery and really reassessing the work that they're doing, and then the enablement team being an expert, right? Getting the data to understand the different behaviors, where the strengths and opportunities lie, and then coming to, and I would lower the bar and just say like, start with like one outcome. Like I think we get too caught up in like there's 20 things we need to do. I'm not saying that there won't eventually be that potentially, but think about like if I had to pick one, like one really, really important outcome, like what's the one outcome I would really obsess over? And again, for us, meeting effectiveness became one to obsess over because we knew the stakes were very high. And when they weren't effective, the likelihood of us, not winning a deal or driving less revenue was really real. Okay. We're going to go to Hillary. What are your thoughts on the split of enablement programs from a business segment, SMB versus enterprise versus global? How do you get the sales teams to buy into the both enablement programs, not them versus us approach? Yeah, so I think there's two parts to this. I mean, the structure piece is potentially a bigger conversation that I'd be happy to further explore with you, Hillary. Structurally, the most important thing to do is make sure the enablement team and the audience it serves have a very close alignment in terms of the folks that are going to be involved in advising around the work the enablement team does, and then the governance in place to help drive priorities and decisions around the work the enablement team is going to do. The more that you do that and you have anchor points around that, structure, for example, you could structure it regionally, you could structure it by different business segments. And then within that, say, okay, this is the audience, this is the group that's going to support this audience. Let's align on the advisory and the steering committee we're going to have in place that the work we do best supports you. The more that you can actually orient yourself around that, um, regardless of the structure, but yes, the structure should get very clear on like what different groups are solving, what different issues. That will help you actually like get to a better joint alignment around the work that you're doing. All right. Let's see. Renee, from your experience, what are the top three deliverables for a sales kickoff meeting? That's a great question. Look, I think if I'm like very honest about SKO overall, like a lot of work goes in SKO, a lot, right? And a lot of it's around, getting people together, getting them rallied, driving inspiration, getting them excited about the year, the quarter of the year ahead, what have you. And then, thinking through the goals and what we need to do. What I would actually prompt the group to think about is like, there's the SKO, then there's what happens after the SKO. So the SKO is really great for, getting people together, driving the inspiration, setting clarity around the goals, how are we going to achieve those goals, et cetera, as a kind of like it's a rallying point. But that rallying point will fizzle. It's like a firework. Like the firework could pop off and look really pretty for a day, but then as you go past that point, it comes down to like the everyday work that's being done, and the enablement team ability to support that work is what's going to make sure that that actually is a flame and not a flicker, if you will. So probably doesn't perfectly answer the three deliverables. I'd say the SKO, sure, inspiration is a really important piece, getting really clear on vision and goals, and then working through with the group on like what are some things we need you to really hone in on and do much better and apply to then walk out of that and have that excitement and have that clarity. But it will, everything after that is what's going to really matter at the end of the day. Okay. I think that rounds, we're towards the bottom on questions so far. So I'll keep an eye in the chat here, but feel free to jump in if there's other questions the group has. We have about 5 minutes left. Here we go. What tips do you have on how to measure the impacts? Okay, so I'll jump into the measurement piece. Highest level order and measurement in the measurement framework we used at Google was the Kirkpatrick model. So for those not familiar, Kirkpatrick model has different levels. You have level one, level two, three, four. Level one, it really just gets into like satisfaction levels. Were they satisfied with XYZ experience they went through? Then you start moving up into confidence and capability. Are they more confident to do the thing? Are they more capable of doing the thing that you've trained them on or coached them on? And then level four gets into actual business impact. What I would offer to you is level four is very hard to get to. And I hear enablement teams talk all the time about like, I can't, like, it's very hard to prove business impact. I would tell you with confidence, the coaching program and building a sales coaching program actually gets to level four. So if you can build an effective sales coaching culture, you can actually attach coaching sessions to your CRM system, to your pipeline, to your deals, and you can start to assess what was the impact on win rate, close rates, deal size, deal velocity, things of that nature for things that were actually coached against versus things that were not. And then you can also assess the impact the manager is having when they are a coach versus when they are not. So those things are very real. When you actually attach a program like that, that is not just a point in time, one and done training exercise, which is very hard to prove that business impact was driven from that. When you actually have something that's flowing all the way through, coaching and practice attached to it, managers getting involved, you can then anchor those things to your CRM system and look at all the what metrics you can actually see, like, are those moving as a result of the work that we're doing. So hopefully that's helpful. But Kirkpatrick model overarching for measurement, and I would challenge you to think it through, like, how do we strive to level four for what we do? And the coaching program for us at Google was one of those programs that did get to level four consistently. Let's see. Adam Boggs. It's a little hard to read on the screen here. Zola, would you mind putting that question in the chat? I only see what are the best ways you've been able to, and I missed the punchline. um, in the meantime, I'm going to go to this one real quick. What are the pieces of data you measure in your CRM against coaching program? Yeah, so I got into this a little bit, but it's all the metrics the business cares about. Same metrics. Um, their pitch rate, win rate. We look at deal velocity. We look at deal size. Are we actually seeing movement on the metrics that matter to the business as a result of going through the coaching program versus not? So we would, number one, like, see, are we seeing an impact there overall? And then we would compare, is there a difference when these deals and these teams have gone through coaching versus the ones that have not? And consistently, we saw increases. Managers were more effective for their team. We saw better results. And then from a business standpoint, meeting effectiveness went up for the first time in 3 years, and so did partner satisfaction. So there was a huge impact from that particular program. The Adam Boggs question: what are the best ways you've been able to measure? Yep, we got into the impact measurement one, and again, like, it's ROI no different than anything else. If your enablement function, if it's seen as a nice to have, then yes, you're going to get into that question of, like, is this an investment or a cost? So the closer you can get to mutually aligning on the outcomes you're driving and the return they're getting as a result, the more you become an embedded strategic partner in their business. Okay, in this one's from Daryl. In regards to meet them in the flow and be in it with them, I immediately thought of the new hire experience and the reality that we give them their book of business territory too early in the onboarding process, which distracts them from learning. I could not agree more with this comment statement. It's a really hard one, right? You bring someone on board, you want them to jump in and race immediately, right? The reality is, no matter how much experience someone has as they come in a new organization, it doesn't mean they understand the way that that organization does things. And the foundation setting is critical for the long-term success. So when we built Google Sales School as an example, it was a pretty long program. The goal for us was to make sure that we had commitment again from the business that by going through this program, here's the things that they're going to learn how to, both know and do effectively, so that when they get to your team, they are all the things that you're going to end up having to do for them because they didn't get onboarding, you won't have to do. Right. We'll make sure that they have clarity on the products and solutions, the skills, that they get a lot of coaching practice and feedback around that. They have the support so that when they get to the team, the ramp time is faster and you're not basically like onboarding them in the flow of the work. What happens is, a lot of cases, if you throw them into the mix too quickly, then they either never learn how to do this properly, they learn it on the job, they learn it in front of customers, or the manager ends up having to become their trainer, right? So there's a lot of risks there. But I would say the biggest piece is think through, what is the onboarding program going to deliver for them? And if you are able to kind of protect them from jumping right into things, but have a clear output and outcome, that what the business is going to get as a result, that can help you kind of drive the justification for that. Let's see, maybe take one more here and then we'll wrap up. Let's see, how do you your team approach requests for training from second line and higher leadership, but find that there's behaviors not taking place at both IC and frontline? How have you found effective to coach in the front line? Let's see. I mean, I would say, like, there's a delicate balance between the conversations you're having at leadership, which is where the decisions ultimately get made oftentimes, and making sure you understand the people who are impacted, right? So the two words I'd use oftentimes were downstream impact, right? You make a very important decision at a very senior level, and maybe you haven't fully thought through downstream who's going to experience the decision you just made. So for us, it was a little bit of both, where we had councils in place to make sure, are we understanding the audience, what they need, getting their feedback, what's important to them, and being a voice, if you will, for all parties in terms of the work that we're doing to best support the outcomes we're driving that the higher level is going to care about, right? So there's a little bit of a delicate balance there of making sure we are a voice for the business as well in terms of the audience that we serve, and that we're getting the right partnership in place at a higher level where the decisions get made. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so we're just about at time. I'm going to take Kelly's question. For those who have to adjourn, I just want to say a huge thank you. I'll stick around to answer one more. Again, like we'll get some resources over to you afterwards, and then you should have access to the form and the different resources we shared today. Please, again, if any of this inspires you to think through how do we just bring this to our organization and make these changes, feel free to reach out, give us feedback, and I'm happy to, explore ways I can support you from here. So I'll take Kelly's question and then we'll adjourn from here. I worked at a company where the sales leadership was heavily involved in holding their own weekly coaching session deal reviews. Do you recommend the enablement team taking over those workshop sessions or hold separate sessions with specific goals? You're going to always have times where the business is going to be doing their own stuff. We talked about this all the time, like, oh, this team's doing their own training, things of that nature. I would find a middle ground in that. It's actually like that's amazing that they're doing that already. Where I think the enablement team can play a really important role, and where the sales coaching program really kind of threaded its way through was we partnered with the business to say we'll align on a consistent, unified way for us to do this strategically, and then we'll be a partner in helping you deliver these coaching sessions so that they actually still feel very much a part of it. You're not taking it away from them, you're doing what an enablement team does. You're truly enabling it. So you bring some expertise to the table in terms of like the way we're going to deliver the sessions. What are the things we want to make sure we focus on? What are we learning from those things? And then you can kind of more strategically partner with them and help them scale it. But taking their ownership away from it, you actually want them to still feel the ownership. But you want enablement to feel like a really key partner, and that you're not just saying, yeah, go ahead and do that, and we'll go do something else. Like I would heavily lean into that actually as a huge opportunity. So with that, again, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you. I know there was so many people on this call today. I really appreciate the participation, the time. The time absolutely flew by. So again, if share feedback, if there's anything else I can do to support you, I do keynotes and workshops on this exact topic and many other things in this space. So please don't hesitate to reach out, connect on LinkedIn. And with that, I will just say thank you again and have an amazing day and best of luck as you move forward from here. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.